By the 1st century BCE, Rome ruled the known world, from the hills of Spain to the sands of the Middle East. But the Republic was rotting from within. Senators grew fat on plunder, while citizens starved in the streets. Generals like Marius and Sulla turned legions against their own city, painting the Forum stones red with Roman blood. The Republic was dying. And in 100 BCE, amid this chaos, a boy was born to a fading noble house. His name, Gaius Julius Caesar. He would become the man who buried the Republic and birthed an empire.
It was the year 100 BCE. Rome stood as the most powerful city in the Mediterranean, but inside its walls, the Republic was tearing itself apart. The Senate claimed to serve the people, yet most senators cared only for power and wealth. The poor filled the streets, the rich filled the palaces. In this world of greed and ambition, Gaius Julius Caesar was born. His family, the Julii, carried noble blood but had lost much of their fortune. His father held a minor political post, while his mother, Aurelia, was known for her discipline and intelligence. She raised Caesar to believe he was destined to stand above others, not as a servant of Rome, but as its master. Rome was ruled by factions. On one side was Gaius Marius, Caesar's uncle by marriage, a champion of the common people. On the other stood Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a general backed by the Senate and the old elite. When their struggle turned into civil war, Caesar's loyalty to Marius put his life in danger. After Sulla seized control of Rome, he ordered Caesar to divorce his wife, Cornelia, Marius's daughter. Caesar refused. That single act marked him for death. His property was confiscated, his title stripped away. He went into hiding, moving between safe houses across Italy. For months, soldiers searched for him, but he always stayed a step ahead. It was Aurelia's connections and persistence that finally saved him. When Caesar finally escaped Rome, he was 20 years old, penniless but alive. He joined the army in Asia Minor, beginning a journey that would teach him how to lead and how to command loyalty. Upon returning to Rome, he began climbing the cursus honorum, the Roman ladder of political offices. First as a military tribune, then as a quaestor, collecting taxes and organizing administration. His name started to circulate in the Senate halls, not yet as a great general, but as a man who knew how to lead and how to make himself known. Caesar understood the Republic was changing. The Senate was filled with old men clinging to their privileges, while soldiers and citizens hungered for someone bold enough to lead Rome forward. He would be that man, but not yet. The time was still coming. Rome itself was pulsing with rivalry. The Republic was not a democracy as we know it. It was a delicate machine run by a few hundred senators, most from powerful families. They ruled provinces, commanded legions, and controlled Rome's wealth. Below them were the equestrians, the business class who profited from trade and tax collection, and then the vast population of ordinary citizens, soldiers and slaves. It was a world where alliances mattered more than ideals. Caesar learned to play that game early. He built ties with the people through grand public speeches and costly games, events he could barely afford. But Rome loved him for it. To fund his ambitions, he borrowed heavily from one of the richest men in the city, Marcus Crassus. Crassus needed influence. Caesar needed gold. Not long after, Caesar's rise quickened. He became Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest of Rome, a position of enormous prestige and public visibility. It gave him access to temples, festivals, and the hearts of the Roman people. In 61 BC, he was sent to govern Hispania Ulterior, a province on the Iberian Peninsula, modern-day Spain and Portugal. It was his first real chance to command troops in the field. There he conquered tribes, won battles, and personally led charges across rough mountains and rivers. In a single campaign, he wiped out the region's debts to Rome, seized gold for his men, and paid back much of his own. For the first time, he held the loyalty of an army, men who would march anywhere for him. When Caesar returned to Rome after that campaign, he had everything: popularity, wealth, and experience. But the Senate still viewed him with suspicion. To secure his position, he needed allies at the very top, and he found them in two powerful men: Crassus, his financier, and Pompey, Rome's most celebrated general. Together, they formed what history would call the First Triumvirate, a private agreement that would quietly control Rome itself. For Caesar, it was the start of something far greater: the path to ultimate power. Pompey, the war hero who had once cleared the Mediterranean of pirates, commanded respect from the army and the people alike. Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, held the purse strings that fed every political campaign. And then there was Caesar, younger, daring, persuasive. He was the bridge between the military glory of Pompey and the financial power of Crassus. Together, they became an unstoppable political machine. The Senate couldn't openly oppose them. Every senator owed one of these men a favor. With their backing, Caesar was appointed consul, one of the two highest offices in the Republic. But Caesar's ambitions reached far beyond the marble halls of the Senate. When his year as consul ended, he needed an army and a frontier to conquer, something that would make his name eternal. And he found it in the vast, untamed lands of Gaul. At the time, Gaul, modern-day France and parts of Belgium, Switzerland, and Italy, was a world of scattered tribes, proud warriors, and shifting alliances. Few Romans dared to rule it. Caesar saw it both as a challenge and an opportunity. For nearly a decade, he led campaigns across thousands of miles, from the Rhine to the English Channel, from dense forests to icy rivers. Each battle multiplied his fame. He defeated the Helvetii, forcing them back across their homeland. He crushed the mighty Suebi along the Rhine. He crossed into Britain, a feat no Roman general had achieved before, showing the world that even the edge of the known earth was not beyond his reach. But the cost was immense. Entire Gallic villages were destroyed, their people enslaved. To his enemies, Caesar was a butcher. By the time the Gallic Wars ended, Caesar had conquered a region larger than any Roman before him, over 800 miles of territory. He returned to Rome not just as a general, but as a living legend. But power breeds envy, and in Rome, envy was deadly. Pompey, once his ally, began to fear him. Crassus, who had always been the balance between the two, died in a failed campaign against Parthia. With his death, the triumvirate collapsed, leaving Caesar and Pompey on a collision course. Now, there were only two men left: Caesar and Pompey, each too powerful to coexist. And as the tension grew, the fate of the Roman Republic hung in the balance. By 50 BC, Rome stood on edge. Caesar's victories in Gaul had made him the most powerful man in the Republic, too powerful for the Senate's comfort. From their marble halls, the senators demanded that he disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. They feared that his legions, veterans who had followed him through 3,000 miles of conquest, would follow him even into the city itself. Pompey, once his ally, now stood as the Senate's sword. He was given control of Rome's defenses, its armies, and its authority. To Caesar, that was betrayal. On a cold night in January 49 BC, Caesar stood before the narrow Rubicon River, the boundary between his province and Italy. Behind him, his legions. Ahead, treason, civil war, and uncertainty. For hours he stood in silence, staring at the dark water. He knew that one step forward meant the end of the Republic as Rome had known it. Then he uttered the words that would echo through history. Alea iacta est, which means the die is cast. With that, Caesar crossed the Rubicon.
News reached Rome at dawn. Panic spread through the streets. Senators fled south with Pompey. The Republic had become a battlefield. Within weeks, Caesar marched nearly 300 miles to Rome, unopposed. Pompey and the Senate escaped to Greece to raise a new army, while Caesar entered the capital as both liberator and outlaw. He spared those who had opposed him, restoring order and promising peace, but his eyes were already on Pompey. By the summer of 48 BC, Caesar crossed the Adriatic Sea with 20,000 men, chasing his rival into Greece. At Pharsalus, Pompey commanded nearly twice his numbers, senators, nobles, and old Roman elites backing him. Pompey's cavalry charged, only to be ambushed by Caesar's hidden reserves. Pompey fled to Egypt, where, seeking favor, the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII had him murdered. The year was 48 BC. Caesar arrived in Alexandria, the glittering heart of Egypt, a city older than Rome itself. He came not as a conqueror, but as a pursuer, chasing Pompey, his rival, and the last obstacle to his control of Rome. But what awaited him was not vengeance, only a corpse. Pompey had already been killed, beheaded on the orders of Egypt's young ruler, Ptolemy XIII, who thought he could please the Roman general. When Pompey's head was presented to Caesar, he turned away in silence. Egypt was no safe haven. Its royal court was split between Ptolemy and his sister, Cleopatra VII, both claiming the throne. Their civil war had turned Alexandria into a city of tension, soldiers, and whispered plots. One night, Cleopatra found her way to Caesar. Hidden inside a rug smuggled into the royal palace, she was unrolled before him. At just 21, her presence was magnetic. She didn't beg for power, she offered an alliance. Caesar, now 52, saw more than beauty. He saw strategy. Through Cleopatra, he could bring Egypt and its endless wealth of grain under Roman influence. Through him, she could reclaim her throne. Together, they faced Ptolemy's army in the siege of Alexandria, a brutal conflict fought through narrow streets and along the harbor walls. By the end of the war, Ptolemy XIII was dead, drowned in the river he once ruled beside. Cleopatra stood victorious. Caesar restored her to the throne, and Egypt became Rome's closest ally. Months later, in the quiet chambers of the palace, Cleopatra bore Caesar a son, Ptolemy Caesar, known to history as Caesarion, Little Caesar. For the first time in years, Caesar slowed his campaigns. He sailed with Cleopatra down the Nile, touring the ancient temples of the pharaohs, where the air carried the weight of divine kingship. But Rome was calling. Unrest was spreading, enemies were regrouping. Caesar left Egypt in 47 BC,
leaving behind Cleopatra and his newborn son. By 44 BC, Julius Caesar had become the most powerful man Rome had ever known. He was no longer just a general, he was dictator for life. The Republic had bowed to him, the Senate followed his word. His face was on the coins, his statue beside those of the gods. To his supporters, he had brought peace. To his enemies, he had killed the Republic itself. Among those enemies stood Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus. Cassius was proud, sharp, and bitter. He had fought for Pompey, and he despised Caesar for seizing power. Brutus was different, calm, educated, and deeply respected. He was known for his honor and was descended from the man who, centuries earlier, helped drive out Rome's last king and founded the Republic. To many Romans, Brutus represented the very spirit of Roman liberty. But Brutus's connection to Caesar was more than political, it was personal. Caesar had long admired Brutus's intellect and integrity. He had spared his life after Pompey's defeat, welcomed him back to Rome, and treated him almost like a son. Caesar had even appointed him to high office and trusted him more than most men in the Senate. Their bond was built on respect, and for Caesar, perhaps even affection. But for Brutus, that bond became a prison of the mind. He loved Caesar deeply, yet every act of loyalty felt like betrayal to the Republic his ancestors had died to protect. Cassius saw this torment and took advantage of it. He whispered that Caesar's rise was the death of freedom itself, that soon there would be no Senate, no Rome, only a crown on Caesar's head. He reminded Brutus that Romans still looked to him, the descendant of the first Brutus, to stand against tyranny. At first, Brutus refused to believe Caesar could ever become a king. But as Caesar accepted more honors, more divine titles, and the Senate's fear grew, doubt began to poison his thoughts. His conscience split between duty to Caesar and duty to Rome. In the days leading up to March, Cassius gathered more senators, men who feared losing their influence, others who truly believed they were saving the Republic. Their plan was clear. Caesar would die on the Ides of March during the next Senate meeting. That morning, Caesar's wife Calpurnia begged him not to leave the house. She had dreamed of his statue bleeding and Romans washing their hands in the blood. Caesar hesitated, uneasy, but then his friend Decimus, himself a conspirator, arrived to escort him to the Senate. He told Caesar the senators awaited him to grant honors, not harm. And among them was Brutus, a face of loyalty Caesar could still trust. Reassured, he went. The Senate met in the theater of Pompey, a place heavy with history. As Caesar took his seat, the conspirators gathered around him, pretending to plead for the return of an exiled ally. When Caesar refused, one of them grabbed his toga. Then, suddenly, steel flashed. Cassius struck first, then Casca, then the rest. The daggers came from every direction. Caesar tried to fight them off, but when he saw Brutus raise his blade, he stopped resisting. "Et tu, Brute," he whispered. "Even you?" In that single moment, all the years of trust and friendship collapsed. And then he fell. They called it the restoration of freedom, but Rome would never again know peace. For in killing Caesar, they had not saved the Republic. They had destroyed the one man who held it together. And with his death, the Roman Republic began its final descent into darkness.